So again, good evening and welcome everyone to the City of Mississauga's live virtual public meeting on Lymantria dispar, otherwise known as LDD or the spongy moth, which we had a little bit of conversation about if you got here early. And in particular to City of Mississauga's planned aerial spray program, which will help protect the city's urban forest from this invasive insect pest. We want to thank you all definitely for taking the time and joining us tonight on a beautiful evening, and we hope to be very informative for you. My name is Steph Shapansky. I'm currently the Director of City's Parks, Forestry, and Environment Division, and I'll be your moderator for tonight's session. Helia Babazadeh will also be assisting us in keeping the meeting on track and taking some of your questions. So before we start, I would like to recognize the Indigenous land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the lands which constitute the present day City of Mississauga as being part of the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Wyandot nations. We recognize these peoples and their ancestors as peoples who inhabited these lands since time immemorial. The City of Mississauga is home to many global Indigenous peoples. As a municipality, the City of Mississauga is actively working towards reconciliation by confronting our past and our present, providing space for Indigenous peoples within their territory to recognize and uphold their treaty rights and to support Indigenous peoples. We formally recognize the Anishinaabe origins of our name and continue to make Mississauga a safe place for all Indigenous peoples. So with that, I know Helia has run through a little bit, but I'd like to take a minute to run through the agenda for tonight's session and walk through some of the logistics of the virtual meeting. We will be starting with following the opening remarks, we will be starting with a presentation from Paul Thibodeau, the project lead for the aerial spray. Paul will walk us through some background on LDD, the outlook for 2022, and more details about what to expect before, during, and after the city's aerial spray. We'll then have a presentation from Franca Ursetti, the Manager of Health Protection Division from Peel Public Health, regarding health information of the aerial spray and how to best prepare. After the presentation, we look forward to taking your questions and explaining what you can do to stay informed and engaged. At this time, I would also like to welcome with us in attendance Ward 1 Councillor Stephen Dasco, Ward 2 Councillor Pat Mullen, Ward 3 Councillor Chris Fonseca, Ward 6 Councillor Ron Starr, Ward 8 Councillor Matt Mahoney, and Jody Robolos, Commissioner of Community Services. Thank you to all of you too for joining us tonight. So as Helia mentioned, for those of you joining us on this WebEx session, you can submit your questions by using the Q&A button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Your question will not appear on the screen, but we will collect them and throughout the session and do our best to answer as many of them as possible this evening. Together with Paul and Franca and Brent Reed, the Manager of Forestry, and myself, we will be standing by to answer any of these questions you might have following the presentations. As Helia mentioned, please note this tonight's presentation will be recorded and will be posted after the event on our webpage at mississauga.ca/2022 spray. We'll give you a little bit more information on that later if you missed my citing of that. So to begin, LDD is a non-native pest that has been present in Mississauga for more than 30 years, and eradication is not possible. Through a variety of integrated pest management measures, including an aerial spray, the city aims to reduce impacts on tree health from LDD in a given year until such time as natural pathogens cause a population level collapse. The city's invasive species management plan and implementation strategy provides a roadmap for the city to manage and address invasive species like LDD. But the city is just one participant, and we all have a role to plan in helping to mitigate the effects of this insect on our urban forest. After the outbreak levels of LDD, that part of the city experienced last year, that the city experienced last year, we are aware that managing LD is a pressure issue. We've heard from over 1,500 residents who have submitted observations of LDD and the hundreds of additional calls placed to our call center that the issue is beyond the scope of what any one person can do individually. Excuse me. On June 16th, 2021, a motion was brought forward to Council by former Councillor Raz, asking for the City of Mississauga to commit to budgeting and planning for an aerial spray to manage LDD in 2022. Over the fall and winter, our detailed monitoring was conducted, and the results support this approach of a planned spray in 2022. An aerial spray is one component of the city's integrated pest management. We know that this can be concerning to many. This is the city's fourth aerial spray, with the previous ones occurring in 2006, 2007, and most recently in 2018. Many of you may have been through these previous aerial sprays, but we know that for some of you, this is a new event, and you may have a lot of questions. Please know that the safety and health of residents and the protection of the environment are our top priorities. We are here tonight to provide more information on the city's plans and to hear from you so we can make this year's program another success. So what I'd like to do right now is introduce Paul Tripideau, the project lead for the aerial spray. Paul?
Thanks, Steph, and good evening to everyone who's joining us virtually from home. My name is Paul Tripideau, as Steph mentioned, and I am the project lead this year for the city's aerial spray for LDD. Just advance the slide here. Okay. So tonight's presentation really is meant to provide you with the information that you're going to need to know about LDD in general and about our aerial spray program in specific. We'll start off by providing some background on LDD. What is it? Why is it a problem? What is its life cycle like? And what impacts can it pose for the city's urban forest? And then we'll move into a little bit of the forecast for LDD in Ontario, and more specifically and more locally here in Mississauga. We'll go over our monitoring program and how that informs the selection of aerial spray areas. And then we'll provide more specific detail about the aerial spray program itself and describe the where, when, and how it will be conducted. Since we know that many of you will have health-related questions about the spray, I'll turn it over partway through the presentation to Frank City from Peel Public Health to go over some more details about the product that we are using in the spray and to describe the ways that you can prepare before, during, and after the spray to feel more comfortable. Following that, we'll come back and describe some more of the other pest management methods that the city will be using and that you can take as a resident to help reduce and mitigate the impacts of LDD locally. And finally, before opening up the floor to questions, we'll talk more about how we're going to be reaching out to you in the coming months and what steps you can take to stay informed about our aerial spray program along the way. So, first, I'd like to start off with a quick note about terminology. Many of you in the room are familiar with this insect pest as the European gypsy moth, but the city, as well as the scientific community, really began transitioning away from that term back in 2021. You'll note in this presentation and in some of the communications material that you've already received from the city that we are referring to this insect by its scientific name, which is Lymantria dispar. But because that's quite a mouthful to say, we usually shorten that down to just LDD. However, recently there's been a new development. So the Entomological Society of Canada has come out after sort of a lengthy process of trying to determine a new common name to replace the European gypsy moth. And that new name is the spongy moth. So although we're not using that terminology in our presentation tonight, you may start to see that around or in other communications in other jurisdictions or neighborhoods as time goes on. That will be sort of slowly transitioned in our material. So, as Steph mentioned, LDD is a non-native insect pest that was introduced from Europe to start a silk industry back in the late 1800s. And since then, it has been spreading progressively westward from the northeastern United States. Um, our first records in Ontario of LDD were back in 1969 in the area around Kingston. And back in 1981, Ontario experienced its first outbreak in eastern Ontario. LDD is a defoliating insect, which means that it eats the leaves of trees, and it prefers to feed on deciduous trees with a preference for oak, but it has been noted to feed on over 400 species of trees. In certain situations, it may even attack conifer trees, but usually this is when other food sources may be low and the population is very high, so there's a lot of feeding pressure. As you can see in the graphic on the right-hand side of the screen, the insect has 4 different life stages. Um, Caterpillars hatch from eggs that were laid in the previous year, and they feed on leaves of trees for about 8 weeks during the spring and summer. It is said that one caterpillar alone can eat 1 meter squared of leaf surface over its lifetime. Those caterpillars then pupate, so that's in the bottom right-hand corner, um, and that's usually over the period of June and July before they will emerge as adult moths shortly thereafter in July and early August. These adults don't last long. Their priority in life is to find a mate and to lay some eggs, and they do so pretty quickly before they die. And then the whole cycle sort of starts again. Those egg masses will stay around for the summer months, over winter, and then in the spring, the caterpillars will emerge from those eggs. Generally speaking, the populations of LDD are affected by a number of different things, including weather conditions and some other natural controls. But the extent to which any of these controls or conditions will affect a population is really difficult to predict. So for example, long periods of extended cold, so temperatures below -20 degrees for successive days can really during the winter months can really lead to a loss of those eggs. But we really don't have a lot of those conditions normally, and they're really hard to predict whether the winter will hold those conditions in any given year. We also know that cool, wet spring weather during the time when the caterpillars are emerging, that cool, wet, sort of humid weather is really, really good at promoting one of the natural controls of the LDD, which is a fungus called Entomophaga mimega. And that fungus um, can increase during those sort of warm, wet conditions. So it's hard to tell what the spring will hold, but if we do have those conditions, it could lead to increased levels of that fungus, which may lead to decreased levels of the caterpillars. Um, LDD is also affected by a couple of other natural pathogens, such as a specific virus that just attacks LDD, and that's called the NPV virus or the nuclear polyhedrosis virus. And that really proliferates when the concentrations of LDD are really high. So that's where, during outbreak conditions of the insect, that virus is really easily spread around and usually helps lead to a crash in the populations. There are also other things like parasitic wasps that prey on the eggs of the LDD, which at a local scale or at a small scale can lead to some reduction in numbers as well, but not huge numbers. So here are just some examples of the LDD in its different life stages and some of the damage that it can cause to trees. In the photo on the left, you can see an egg mass, which is this sort of fuzzy white or tan blob in the middle of the picture, surrounded by recently hatched caterpillars. Now, these are really tiny caterpillars. Many of you are probably more familiar with the caterpillars that look a bit more fully grown on the right-hand side of the screen. So those caterpillars, will start off really small, and they'll go through different growth stages and eating more and more leaves as time goes on. And it is said that in each egg mass for LDD, you can have between 100 and 1,000 caterpillars hatching from it. So these photos start to tell a little bit of a story about impacts to trees and tree health. In the photo on the left, you can see what looks like a completely leafless tree. This was taken back in June of 2021, last summer. But from the look of it, it really looks like it's December, that there are no trees on any of those trees in the photos. So LDD in this particular area was so high that every tree in the neighborhood was completely defoliated. Um, this type of defoliation can seemingly come overnight because of the high numbers of LDD. They're eating a lot of leaves, and you could have trees that have leaves on them one day and then no leaves or fewer leaves the next. It can be a really rapid process. And as many of you will know from last year's infestation and situation, in high population years, the caterpillars themselves can be quite a nuisance. They don't just stick to trees, they will cover almost every square inch of your property and your home and your yard, and they can be found everywhere. So LDD is not just restricted to Mississauga. This insect is present across southern and central Ontario, and the issues related to defoliation in trees exist in those areas too. The province of Ontario does careful monitoring of LDD and other tree defoliator pests. And I'll show some figures on the following two slides, which will depict how the LDD population has really expanded rapidly over the last couple years. So the monitoring conducted by the Ministry of Northern Development and Mines and Natural Resources and Forestry, which is a really long name for a ministry, they identified about a 4,100% increase in the area affected by moderate to severe defoliation of trees in the province between 2019 and 2021. So in perspective, that's going from around 43,000 hectares of areas defoliated in 2019 to over 1.8 million areas of the hectares of the province defoliated in 2021. So there has been a really rapid rise at the provincial level. And we can see that in these maps here. So this is a map from the defoliation that was experienced in 2019. You can see the red areas are those areas of moderate to severe defoliation in trees. It's really sort of confined to southwestern Ontario and the Niagara Peninsula. But if we skip ahead to 2021, you can see that the area that has been defoliated to a severe degree in Ontario has really expanded and really expanded rapidly, so that we're getting areas of Eastern Ontario, areas of the GTA, and all the way up into sort of the Georgian Bay area, cottage country. That has really taken off. Now, you may notice in these two maps that the area around Mississauga, which is sort of shown in the center of the photo, doesn't have much coverage. And that's really just because the ministry doesn't do a lot of monitoring in urban areas. But you can see, at least from this graphic, that the areas surrounding Mississauga and the more rural communities and the more natural areas are also experiencing that defoliation pressure. So for Mississauga, we have to rely on our own monitoring to know what's really happening locally. We can't just rely on this provincial scale modeling. And how do we do that? So the city undertakes a detailed monitoring program in the fall of every year, and that's centered around counting the number of LDD egg masses, so those white or tan colored blobs that we saw in a photo on a few slides previous. So we do this through a consulting company called Bioforest, who are leaders in the industry and who undertake this work for communities across the GTA and in Southern Ontario. And that monitoring helps us to predict what the population of LDD will be for the following spring. Because if you remember, the adult moths lay their eggs in sort of midsummer and then they perish. And so we're left with all these egg masses that we can count easily and get population projections for. So to do the monitoring, the city is broken down in these 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid squares. And based on the observations of LDD from the previous spring and summer, so for 2021, grids known to have LDD were selected for this more intensive survey. So within those 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grids, we set up three survey plots. And these are strategically located in areas that are known to have host trees. So we said earlier that LDD really likes oak trees. So we set it up in areas where those host trees and host habitat is really known to be present. And in each of those plots, we survey 5 different trees, 5 different host trees for the presence of egg masses. We also do this so this is monitoring that happens sort of in residential communities and neighborhoods where there's a more urban fabric to the city, but we also undertake detailed monitoring in a similar way within our natural areas and our forests and our parks. Because of the different makeup of a forest versus sort of a residential community, we want to really we want to sample those in a similar way, but we want to make sure we're capturing what's happening in a forest versus a residential area, because the makeup of the trees can be different, the density of the trees can be different, and we want to make sure we know what's happening. So we do parks and we do neighborhoods. And like I said, this data helps us tell what the LDD population is going to be for the following year. A few things we do monitor in this program are the quantity of egg masses. That provides us an estimation of what the population is likely to be. So we know that each of those eggs can lead to up to 1,000 caterpillars. But we also look at the size of those egg masses, because that can tell us about the relative health of about the females who are laying those egg masses. Larger sized egg masses mean more future caterpillars, and they're a sign of a healthier, robust population because the females that laid it had plenty of resources the summer before and were in good health when they laid those eggs. We also check for the ratio of new egg masses versus old egg masses, because you can see the remnants of old egg masses that have already hatched out. They can still be present on the trees. And so that ratio of new to old can tell us whether or not the population is likely increasing over time or decreasing over time. So this figure here, or the red areas displayed on this figure over here, are the areas that the city chose for its egg mass monitoring program in the fall of 2021. And as you can see, they cover quite a large swath of the city. This figure also displays the observations that we received from the public and how those were captured in our monitoring program. Where there were concentrations of public reports, so those public reports are shown in the black dots. So where there were concentrations of those reports and other known areas of LDD, those were included in the monitoring program and monitored by our consultants to help verify the population for 2022. Just bear with me 1 second here. Great. So, so the city of Mississauga, as Steph mentioned, last undertook an aerial spray back in 2018 in response to a large outbreak that occurred over the spring of 2017, so the previous year. And that 2018 spray was really effective at reducing the LDD population within those spray zones for the following few years. However, as we saw in Ontario, a similar rapid expansion happened in Mississauga across 2021. We saw that rapid expansion occur here in Mississauga as well. And the results of our monitoring data confirm that high levels of LDD that were experienced last year in the summer of 2021 are going to persist again in a large area of the city in 2022. So they aren't declining. There we go. The figure on this slide shows the results of that egg mass monitoring data that were provided by our consultants from last fall. It depicts how the LDD population in 2022 is really concentrated in a few different areas of the city. So as you can see, it's really concentrated in the southern part of Mississauga, as well as areas along the Credit River. But we're also seeing these satellite populations in areas sort of in the northeast and northwest, in some of the woodland and natural area communities in those areas. And so within these areas that are represented by the red hashing, these are the areas where the impacts on the city's urban forest are predicted to be the greatest due to severe defoliation of the tree canopy. As you can see, affected areas are predicted in all wards of the city except for ward number 4. And the high priority areas for the aerial spray treatment are identified based on these population predictions. So we're looking where the impacts are going to be the greatest, where that defoliation to the canopy is going to be the most severe. And to give you a sense of what severe really means, we're looking at projected losses to the canopy of between 91 and 100% leaf loss. So that's almost complete, or it is complete, defoliation of those tree canopies. And what that really means is we're looking at situations where there's over 5,001 egg masses per hectare within our woodland plots, or over 101 egg masses on average per tree in those neighborhood and residential areas. And we have sort of two different scales that lead to the same result based on whether you're inside of a woodland or whether you're inside a residential area. As I mentioned, the characteristics of those areas are a little bit different. So thinking about those numbers, the 5,001 egg masses per hectare, that's about, for the average size of a football field, that would mean that there would be 5 million caterpillars present. And we don't expect that the caterpillars are going to kill the trees themselves in these areas, but what they do is they weaken them to a point where other diseases and weather fluctuations or extreme weather events could have an impact on their health. And where trees experience this severe defoliation in successive years, one after the other, this is where the impacts on the tree health are really the greatest, especially if we're seeing that defoliation in 2022 in areas that were defoliated in 2021. So in order to address this issue, the aerial spray will also target not only those severe areas, but also smaller hotspots predicted to have heavy defoliation, which is just sort of one level below severe, if they've also experienced severe defoliation last year. And so heavy defoliation, as opposed to severe, is where we're looking at 3,751 to about 5,000 egg masses per hectare in a woodland, or between 41 and 100 egg masses per tree in a residential neighborhood. So the city took this baseline egg mass monitoring data that we got from our consultants and the identification of where those high priority areas were, and we did some further analysis on that to determine the aerial spray areas for 2022. And this work included additional street tree and park tree surveys conducted by forestry staff in order to verify the consultants' information and their data, a review of street tree and ecological data to identify the location of host trees. So we're really targeting the areas where LDD is likely to be the most present and have the most impact. We also reviewed all of the reports that we got in through the public, through our public reporting map, which we'll talk about later, the 311 call center, direct calls and emails that we've received through our office, and information received from our counselors' offices. And we took all that information and tried to really refine those high priority areas that we got from the initial mapping. We also looked at those areas and we removed from them any areas that were not suitable for aerial spraying. So where there were large areas that didn't have any trees, so parking lots, shopping malls, highways, areas that we wouldn't spray because there's no point in spraying them. We removed from our spray areas, and the result of that exercise was the map that you see on the right-hand side of your screen here. And that is, these are the proposed aerial spray areas for 2022 in blue. And they total about 2,091 hectares of the city, or around 5,167 acres. Um, and we're confident that this plan and this map really addresses the known LDD hotspots across the city where that damage to the city's tree canopy is going to be the greatest. But as Steph mentioned, as LDD cannot be completely eradicated from the city, there will still be LDD present elsewhere and outside of these spray areas. So outside of the spray areas that you can see here in blue, the city will also be undertaking other pest management methods, such as egg mass scraping or ground-based treatments, especially along the leading edges, so that we can make sure we've captured the population where it exists in the greatest concentration, and so that we don't see expansion into those to those border areas in the future. And that this information and work will help reduce the impacts on the urban forests and also help residents preserve and protect the tree health. We'll also be looking to provide materials and information to the public so that in these areas so that they can also, you can also help combat LDD on your own properties. Additionally, we've looked to see how we can improve our own pest management program internally so that we can be more responsive to how this insect really functions and our programming. And so our integrated pest management program for LDD has been adapted so that in the future we can do smaller targeted aerial sprays, potentially on a more frequent basis, to ensure that any new areas that flare up can be addressed through our annual program instead of having to wait several years in between a large aerial spray such as the one such as those we've done in the past. Okay, I'd like to turn now to provide a little bit more information on what the aerial spray is really going to look and feel like and what you can really expect from the aerial spray in 2022. Uh, you may recall from our initial communications material that had been sent out that we set an aerial spray window of between April 25th and June 12th. That was the time we were thinking that it could be potential for the aerial spray to happen. But we are constantly doing modeling and getting monitoring data from our consultants, and that updated modeling has really narrowed our window. So our new window that we are promoting now is that the spray will happen sometime between May 15th and June the 12th. And there are a number of factors that that really combine to determine when the actual spray dates will really happen. So for the spray to be effective, we need a few things to really coalesce all together. We need leaves to be on trees, and we need those leaves to have emerged in the spring to about 30% of their actual size. And we need caterpillars from those egg masses to be hatched almost at 100%. And the reason for this is that we need the product that we're going to be spraying on them. Uh, we need it to settle, we need it to have something to settle on. So we need the leaves to be present, and we need the caterpillars to be actively feeding on those leaves for them to be able to ingest the product and to die. So what this means for residents is that you will you will see caterpillars out there during their initial phases. We need them to be hatched out, and that they will be present. They won't just be stopped before they hatch. And we will be continuing to work with our consultants, bioforests, to monitor the growth and development of the caterpillar and the growth and size of the leaves throughout the city at strategic locations so that we can actually pinpoint the most effective dates for the spray to happen in the areas that we're proposing to spray. So we're collecting that local data to really drive our program. We'll also be monitoring the weather conditions on a daily basis to ensure that we select the ones that are appropriate for spraying. For the spraying to occur and to be effective, we really need really low winds. We need average temperatures, high humidity, and no precipitation in the forecast. So all of that combines to say we don't actually know when the spray dates will happen within that larger window until about 48 hours before the spray will occur. At that point, at that 48-hour point, we will update a number of our communications materials to keep you informed. So, and we'll talk about this later in the presentation, but we'll have updates on our website. We'll be sending out emails through our distribution list. We'll be updating our 311 call center. So if you call in for information, they'll provide that to you. And we'll publish it through our social media venues so that you can all stay informed. So the spray program really will consist of helicopters, as you can see in the photo on the right-hand side. We'll have 2 helicopters covering the city. There will be 2 sprays that happen over separated by a period of about 7 to 10 days. And those sprays occur during the early morning hours. So it will occur between 5 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. when most of the population is either sleeping or just waking up or still in their homes. Um, but you are still likely to hear those helicopter sounds and see those helicopters overhead in those early morning hours. As you can see from the photo on the right-hand side, the helicopters do fly very low so that they really target the tree canopies. They're flying at about 15 to 30 meters above those tree canopies so that we get that coverage because we don't want the product to be dispersed. We want it to be settling on the areas that we're targeting. So the compound that we're using in the aerial spray is called BTK, or also known as Bacillus thuringiensis subspecies kerstaki, in the formulation of 4A48B. This is a biological insecticide that is approved for use in organic agriculture in both Canada and the United States. It is a naturally occurring bacteria that's found in the soil and very specific to caterpillars that are feeding at the time that it is sprayed. Um, BTK breaks down in the sunlight and is active for only about 1 to 4 days. Because of the short lifespan, we do need to do that second spray. So I mentioned in the previous slide that we're going to be doing 2 sprays over each area. So we really need to do that second spray to ensure that we're knocking back the catter population to as low as possible and reduce the impacts on the urban forest canopy. This compound, so BTK and 4A48B, was the same compound that was used in all of the city's previous sprays, so in 2006, 2007, and 2018. And it is approved for aerial use over urban areas by the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, which is a division of Health Canada. Um, as with previous aerial spray programs undertaken by the City of Mississauga, the Region of Peel Public Health is committed to supporting the aerial spray program by addressing health-related questions raised by the public in regard to our use of BTK. And Peel Public Health will be providing more information in this presentation as well. So once the spray has been completed, it doesn't mean that our work is done or that our program is over. The city will be working with its consultants, Bioforest, to undertake detailed efficacy monitoring to determine the success of the spray. So that will include monitoring and modeling the spray deposits on select areas of the spray by collecting leaves and other samples to ensure that the BTK was actually applied correctly at the concentrations that we wanted. And that there was good coverage across the spray area to ensure that it was effective. We'll also be conducting follow-up defoliation monitoring, and that's to see what the actual impact on the forest canopy was. So did we see a noticeable decline and loss of leaves, or was that tree canopy maintained and protected. It's also our intention to come back to Council in the fall with the details of these results and information about how the program went. So to successfully implement a spray program like this, we're working with a large group of internal and external stakeholders and city departments. These stakeholders help really guide our spray activities to make sure that the operators of the helicopters are safe and kept safe during the application, as well as the general public. Um, some of the groups that we're working with, just to name a few, are traffic operations, capital works, fire and emergency services, police services, as well as our counterparts at the local, regional, provincial, and federal levels. The reason why we work with these groups is that there is a lot of logistics and a lot of approvals that need to be in place for an aerial spray to happen in the first place. And the two main approvals that we are required to achieve are an alternative means of notification under the Pesticide Act from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. This approval basically ensures that our notification to the public is acceptable to the ministry to keep you all informed. Just because of the large size of our spray this year, we can't put out little tiny signs saying that we're using a product. We really need to do a full-scale communications campaign to make sure that everyone is kept in the loop and has the information they need to make informed choices during the spray. The other approval that is required is a Transport Canada ministerial exemption for the helicopters to fly at really low altitudes through these urban areas. The current regulations for aircrafts is that they should be flying at about 1,000 feet above built-up areas, but the helicopter, as I mentioned, is going to be flying at about 15 to 30 meters, so that's around 50 feet from the treetops to ensure that that spray is effective. So we need that ministerial exemption. The approval from Transport Canada really relies on detailed traffic management plans, road closures, signage to ensure that we're not impacting traffic. And the main reason for that is, when you see a low-flying helicopter over some of these areas, it can be a visual distraction for drivers. So we want to make sure that drivers in these areas are kept safe and that we have no incidents during the spray. Any road closures that we do will be short in nature, and really it's just when the helicopter is completing its initial passes across those roadways or near those roadways before they move on to additional areas. In addition, we'll be doing park and trail closures at a local level just to ensure that residents aren't out in our parks and natural areas or walking their dogs, enjoying nature while the spray is actually occurring during those early morning hours. I'd like to turn it over now to Frank City from the region of Peel, who will give you a little rundown about the public health perspective.
Thanks very much, Paul, and good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you. I will be looking to the side as I've had to join using my phone, and I need to look at the bigger screen in order to see my slides. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I will just provide some brief comments here just in terms of the aspects, the public health aspects that we've considered here. And they really fall into three categories. The first category being the product being used in the aerial spray program, giving you a little bit of information on the assessment that we do and that we have done and conducted on that. Thinking about the broader context as well, we also want to have a brief mention of the health considerations and implications associated with a healthy tree canopy, as well as the implications associated with direct exposure to the pests themselves if they're left unchecked and the infestation continues to grow. Next slide, please. So Paula mentioned the product here. The active ingredient is the bacillic BTK, as referred to. It's been used and approved for use in the aerial spray program. It's been used here in Mississauga as well as a number of other jurisdictions for many years. Our, in terms of Peel Public Health, we in previous Mississauga spray programs, as well as in this year's program, we have done a review of the literature. We do look back at the evidence in the peer-reviewed and published health literature, as well as the gray literature. Gray literature is simply literature looking at assessments from other government organizations that may be published under the government press. And we look at the, we've done this review in all the previous spray programs, and we did it again this year to ensure that there haven't been any new reports that have been published in the intervening periods. We want to make sure that we've captured it all. With each review, as I mentioned, we look at the peer review published literature, and we pay particular attention to not just the findings, but we look at the methods, we look at the designs of the studies. We're looking for very high quality research and studies, and we are very intentional about this in order that we are in any advice that we provide, in any assessments or recommendations, that we have relied and looked at the quality of the literature that we understand the quality of the literature that we're using to inform our advice. Next slide, please. In addition to the evidence review of the literature, we also look to our surveillance data. Because this program has been run in Mississauga before, we have tracked and collected information as those programs have run, and we will continue to do that as well in the 2022 program. And the surveillance activities really fall into three categories. We will, of course, respond to and address any questions, concerns about health and the use of this BTK program in the aerial spray. And we'll track that information. During the spray and after the spray, if we get any calls or get any reports of health complaints from the community, we will investigate those, and to see if, to thoroughly understand if there are any short-term health effects associated with that aerial spray. In the second category of surveillance activities, we work with our physicians and ask them to do the same. So we will be sending out a notice to our health professionals in Peel that'll go out shortly. We do this with two intentions, two purposes. One, to make them aware of the program so that they can support their patients if there are questions that they need to address. But also, secondly, to give them information on how they as physicians can report any complaints to us during or after the spray program. The last category of surveillance activity is emergency room admissions data. So we have a partnership with our local hospitals where emergency room admissions data is available to us. We will monitor that data for specific complaints that are relevant for this type of activity. And we will look at that data and compare any changes for things, for example, or complaints like, for example, admissions due to asthma or other respiratory complaints. And we will look to see if there's any difference before or after the spray, to see if there's any trend information in that data. So as I mentioned, we will do that in 2022, but to give you a sense of the previous surveillance data, we in 2006 and 2007, we had fewer than 10 inquiries, and that number includes any physician inquiries that would come in at that time. Unfortunately, at that time, the emergency room admission program wasn't available, so we don't have that data for that time period. But in 2018, we had a significant, about 3 times the number of inquiries, about 32. No physician reports at that time, and the emergency room admissions remained stable over that time period. Now, the inquiries in both 06, 07, and in 2018, most of those inquiries were in fact related to general inquiries. In the first time around, it was predominantly about impact on property and outdoors, and some questions around health. In 2018, there were lots of clarifying questions around our process to review the health implications, around things that individuals might choose to voluntarily want to do to reduce exposure, and things, and questions about protecting their property. There was one report of an irritant impact, a temporary effect, where an individual happened to be directly in the spray outdoors directly while at the time that the helicopter went overhead. And so we investigated that complaint, and it resolved quickly, and that individual just wasn't aware and didn't was exposed directly on that particular morning. So generally speaking, we're not anticipating any adverse health impacts from the aerial spray, where we would anticipate increased respiratory effects, where we would expect it to impact individuals with asthma. In fact, the health evidence review also showed that in vulnerable populations, children with asthma, for example, didn't show any increased symptoms before or after the aerial spray, and this was in a controlled study. So that's just one example, but it was supported in the literature. Next slide, please. Thank you. So having said that, we do know that in some infrequent instances, in particular, as I mentioned, the one individual that was directly exposed at the time of the spray, we are asking and recommending that people stay indoors for about 30 minutes after the spray, just to allow those droplets to settle. You know, there are some additional things that can be, you know, these may additional things that people can do also to avoid exposure should they choose, you know, closing the windows, bringing in their things from outdoors to avoid the need to wash it down afterwards, setting their air conditioner vents, for example, to a closed position, or recirculate the air if you can do that. And afterwards, ensuring just washing things down and avoiding kind of that hand-to-mouth activity, certainly washing hands and any fruits and vegetables that might be consumed. Okay, next. So one point here is these suggestions are on this slide, but they will also be, and they have also been included in the material that is posted to the website, should you wish to use that. Next slide, please. So the last slide I'll address here is these two other kind of categories of considerations, and kind of rounds out the context of health, the health considerations here. So, you know, we know we're experiencing an LDD outbreak here, but and we know that trees, you know, impacting that tree canopy can impact health as well. A healthy tree canopy has lots of benefits, including health benefits. Trees can filter the air, and you know, air quality is important, certainly air pollutants, and anything that can reduce the pollutants in air benefit our health as those pollutants can have an impact. Trees reduce the need for energy use and provide that cooling and shade area, which is particularly important as on those extreme heat days where we might be at risk for heat stress. That provides environment that promotes physical activity and improves physical health, and allows us to walk or run or do other active things, that of course also benefits and reduces the burden of chronic disease in individuals. So that's super, that kind of that broader concept is of health, and the importance of a canopy towards promoting good health is something that we consider. And lastly, this picture on the right here is of a rash caused by LDD. We know that LDD outbreaks have been associated with skin rashes and upper respiratory tract irritation, typically from the hairs or the silk threads from the caterpillars or the shed skin. We do recommend that people avoid exposure to, like, direct exposure handling and touching the caterpillar. Particularly children should be discouraged from playing with them. It's the spiny hairs on the caterpillar itself can cause welts, or this patchy rash that you see in the photo, which can sometimes persist for about 4 to 5 days. That kind of addresses the health considerations, but before I turn it to Paul, I do want to just note that on the last slide, or one of the concluding slides that Paul has there, is the phone number on how to reach Peel Public Health. If you do have any questions around health and the use of BTK, you can feel free to take that number down and call, and we can address those questions. Thank you. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Franca. Yeah, so we've talked a lot about the aerial spray. I wouldn't mind just spending a little time just talking about other pest management measures that are part of the fulsome program and approach to managing LDD in the city. Some of these include sort of manual controls, like egg mass scraping that really or installing burlap along trees, which can be seen in the center photo. And that burlap sort of concentrates caterpillars there so that they're easily picked off or destroyed. Other treatments that are available to the city and to you as residents include ground treatments like spraying BTK from the ground as opposed to spraying from a helicopter, as well as doing injections of trees with a product called triazine. There are resources on our website, including instructions on how to do some of these techniques, as well as instructional videos showing you how we do them and how you can do them on your own property. The link to our website will be shared at the end of the presentation. But really, given the size and the distribution of the LDD population in 2022, aerial spray really is the most effective approach to treatment this year. And some of these other integrative pest management techniques aren't available at the scale that we would need to deal with the size of the problem. But we will be including some of these management techniques in areas outside of the aerial spray zone to provide that little bit extra protection to reduce the LDD populations on the fringes. So there are many tools that the city has been developing that will help you navigate and stay informed, navigate the aerial spray process and to stay informed over the next few months. We have a pretty rigorous communications plan that is targeted to provide information before the spray, during the spray, and after the spray program. We're using all of the same methods that were used to communicate back in the previous spray in 2018, such as newspaper ads, resident mail-outs, e-blasts, social media, but we've also incorporated lessons learned from our last spray program. So we are putting out translated materials into different languages in our newspaper advisories, just so that we can reach additional residents that we may not traditionally market to. We've also created a detailed spray website, which again we'll be showing you on the next slide, that will host an interactive map of all of the spray areas so that you can easily search and identify areas that are of concern to you and find out whether your home or your school or your or your favorite place in the park, in the city, is within the aerial spray zone or outside of the aerial spray zone. And you'll also be able through our website to sign up for regular email notifications so that you can stay informed during the spray, before and during the spray period. Our website is meant to be updated continuously and provide you the most up-to-date information so that we can respond to your questions that you ask. We will also have program information available through our 311 call center, so that if you don't have access to the internet or prefer to receive information via the phone, you can always call or email in to our call center for that updated information whenever you so choose. So there's a couple slides here just to end the presentation about how you can stay informed for different questions that you may have. I know there's been a number of questions coming in through the Q&A chat, and hopefully this answers some of the questions that come in, and happy to take more questions afterwards. So if you want more information about the specific spray dates or general program information or answers to frequently asked questions, please visit our website, and that's mississauga.ca/2022 spray. That is really the one-stop shop for information, and it'll provide you a link to a whole bunch of different resources that you can choose to stay informed during our program. That is also the location where you can sign up for those email notifications. As mentioned in one of the previous slides, we will be able to provide 48-hour notification of the spray dates, and that will be communicated through these various methods that you see here on the screen, through the website, through these email notifications, through our 311 call center, and by following us on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at City of Mississauga or at Sauga Parks and Rec. Again, information will be updated as the program goes on. If you have specific questions about the spray areas and whether you're inside the spray areas or near the spray areas, on our website at mississauga.ca/2022 spray, you will find our interactive map. And that interactive map lets you put in an address or search manually and see the extent of the spray, or really toggle between whether your home or your work or your school is within the spray area. We will also be updating this map. There's a legend at the side. Once we know the spray dates, we'll be updating those areas with which areas are proposed to be sprayed on which days. So you can check this map to see if that spray is planned to occur, has already occurred. As I mentioned before, there are 2 sprays that happen, separated by about 7 to 10 days approximately. So you can always check if one spray has been done and the second one is planned or scheduled, and keep yourself informed that way. And we'll, depending on the questions that come up, we can even go through this interactive map during the Q&A, and I can show you a bit more about how to use it if you've got questions. Lastly, but not least, if you do have questions or concerns about health and the use of BTK, as Franca mentioned during her presentation, the Region of Peel Public Health has a hotline set up that you can call in with your questions, and that's 905-799-7700. If you have other questions related to your own particular situation, you can also follow up with your family physicians. As Franca mentioned earlier too, the Peel Public Health is working with family physicians to ensure that they have information about the spray, and so that they are well informed of what we're doing. So here we are. Thank you so much for your time tonight. This has been a really valuable session, and we hope that the presentations that we've provided here today provide some of the information and resources that you are going to need to navigate this spray and make it as comfortable as possible for you. I will pass it back to Helia now, and just before we open it up to questions from the audience. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul and Franca. Great presentations. Folks, a lot of information. I hope you found it of great value. Before we move to some of the questions, and there are a lot of questions, so we will try to answer them all. There are some questions on some information that might have been presented after your question, but we will still ask as many as we can. But at this point, I would like to open the invitation to any of the councillors who, and I don't want to put you on the spot, who might want to just step forward onto the panel to say any words or not. And I think we have Councillor Dasco from Ward 1, Councillor Mullen from Ward 2, Councillor Fonseca from Ward 3, Councillor Mahoney from Ward 8, and I believe there's a 6 in there. Yep, Councillor Starr from Ward 6. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening, all. Thanks for coming out and great presentation, staff.
Yes.
I think people have been waiting to ask their questions, so I think we'll just move forward.
Oh, okay. So since I'm the moderator, I'm going to be the one reading them out, and our panel will take advantage and answer any questions that might suit them. So first question. We are talking about spongy moth here, which I believe means gypsy moth. Is the BTK treatment also effective against cankerworms?
Yeah, I can handle that one. Thanks, Steph, for the question. Yes, so BTK is effective against fall cankerworm, and it was the chemical that was applied during the 2018 spray, which was a spray geared toward both cankerworm and LDD at the time. So it is the same. It is the same product that is used and effective against both.
Thank you, Paul. Moving along, what about the downstream effects of this pesticide, BTK, effects on other insects and animals besides this one species of caterpillar?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one as well. So there is a lot of study that does go on before this product can be used safely in Canada. So it's studied extensively by Environment Canada and the Pest Management Regulatory Agency. And the information that we have from these sources is that BTK doesn't really bioaccumulate, so it doesn't persist in the environment long term. It does biodegrade in, like I mentioned in the presentation, sort of between 1 and 4 days. So those sort of like downstream effects aren't anticipated. And there have been studies that show that it does not affect adult butterflies, other insects, mammals especially, and that it really is it is effective against caterpillars that may be out at the time that the spray occurs, but not these other insects and other wildlife.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'm going to try and spread these out. But these might be leaning towards our forestry group more than others. So how does this year's program compare to previous years?
I think I've got the answer for that one too.
Sorry.
So this year's program, as mentioned, is going to cover about 2,091 hectares of the city. The previous spray in 2018 was of a similar but slightly smaller size. It was just around 2,000 hectares. The areas that are covered are similar. So that southern Mississauga, the areas along the Credit River, those are areas that were sprayed in 2018 and that are mostly planned to be sprayed again here in 2020. The one noticeable difference between the two programs that I can see are that our monitoring has really shown those high concentration populations in some of these woodlands and natural areas that are, like I said, in the northeast and northwest and north part of the city, which didn't experience the same pressures back in 2018. We know that there's also a concentration in Ward 3 as well that was not part of the aerial spray in 2018, but we have since had monitoring to show that the LDD is present in those areas and in some locations to a high degree. So we have seen some range expansion, I would say, since the previous spray. But as for the components of the program is relatively the same. So we are using an aerial spray just as we did in previous years. We are also using some of those other integrated pest management techniques like egg mass scraping and burlap banding in areas that are outside of the spray to complement the spray and to sort of reduce those populations in the fringe zones. So it's the same type of program, I would say.
Okay, I was looking for a question for Franca to give you a break there, but there's a similar question here. Paul, if you may, why can't you walk and spray? Why do you have to administer this by flying?
Yeah, and that is a great question, and something we take really seriously. So, the city doesn't want to spray BTK from a helicopter if we don't have to. It's an expensive endeavor. It's a concerning endeavor for people who haven't been through it before. And so if there are other management techniques that can address the problem that don't involve that spraying from the helicopter, we look for those options. But where we really need the aerial spray are in areas where, so woodland conditions, you can't really access many of our woodlands and natural areas with a person and a hose or a truck and a person and a hose. There are no roads or paths wide enough to get into all of the nooks and crannies and to really treat all the canopies of those trees within those natural areas. So when we're looking at a forest or a woodland or other natural area, we really the aerial spray is the most effective technique. Similarly, through some of the neighborhoods where you have really high tree canopy, and I'm thinking down into wards 1 and 2 where there's a lot of large, old, established trees. The actual range of a spray hose or a hydraulic hose isn't very high. So from the ground, you can maybe get 15 meters or so off the ground on a good day with no wind. But anything that's higher than that, you really can't get up into those canopies where all of the LDD caterpillars are really going to be munching away on those leaves. So we look to use the aerial spray as an option in areas where we have woodland conditions, where we have tree canopies that are really high, and where the concentration of trees is just so dense that it's more efficient to use this method than by spraying an individual tree, which is very time consuming and difficult to do.
That was a great answer, Paul. You answered a number of very similar questions, so great answer. Along the same lines, and I'm still looking, Franca, I do have one. Although you are focusing on forest areas and not residential, what can we do for infested trees on residential properties?
So yeah, great question again. So just to be clear that the city's program does focus on both forests and natural areas as well as residential areas. We are spraying both types of areas in the city. But if you're looking for options on what you can do as a homeowner on your own property to help reduce the impacts of LDD on your own trees, there are a number of different things. Some of those we talked about in the presentation. So getting out there and scraping those eggs during the winter, you can still scrape them now, anytime before the caterpillars have hatched is a good time for scraping. As we mentioned, each of those egg masses can have up to 1,000 caterpillars in them. So by scraping away them at this time of year, you're getting at them when they're concentrated and you don't have to do too much work. But that's only really effective when you have smaller trees where you can reach all of the egg masses that you need to scrape. For larger trees, you can consider something like putting up a burlap band. And during the heat of the day, the caterpillars seek out shade, so they'll come down from the tree canopies. They'll go under the burlap that you wrap around your tree. And so you can go out and check that burlap and you can squish or otherwise dispose of the caterpillars that you find. You can also choose to do chemical treatment. So you can hire a professional tree care company to administer the BTK, or you can administer the BTK yourself. Typically it's sold in garden centers, but you can get a tree care company out there to do that for you, or inject your trees with another product that isn't BTK, but it's called triazine, and that has to be applied by a licensed applicator. So call around different tree care companies or arborists, and they may be able to advise you. We do have information and resources on our website, including some videos on how to do burlap banding, how to do egg mass scraping, so it can show you how to do it and the resources that you'll need to do it. So check our website, mississauga.ca/2022 spray. There's some videos up there, or our general website, which is mississauga.ca//LDD, and that has some more paper-based information on these types of methods.
Great answer, Paul. And Helia, maybe we can post that before the end of the evening in the chat so people can make note while we're still online. Okay, Franca, maybe I have one for you. Are there any health concerns and I know you gave information about this in the presentation, but the question is here. Are there any health concerns, risks with the aerial spray on us or wildlife or insects? So I think it's a shared question there.
Based on both, looking at the evidence, the high quality evidence that's published. So these would be studies that would look at other communities or other cities that have done aerial spray programs and compared either symptom follow-ups or hospital admissions or emergency room admissions in some instances, and comparing those reports or that data before and afterwards. We're not anticipating any effects. So those studies didn't show any impacts. Our own surveillance data, because this is something that we have in Mississauga has been done before, it also did not. We weren't seeing a signal in that. I mean, there may be some irritant, with direct exposure to eyes or skin. So I think it is to the extent that we can avoid direct exposure. I think it's prudent. It's why we're asking people to stay indoors. Those are typically very short-lived and resolve quite quickly.
Thank you. Along the same lines, and we are asking people to stay inside during the spray hours, and we're doing that early in the morning. But a question here from one of the residents: during the spray period, should we not look up in the sky? And part two of that, will this spray damage our vehicles?
It's advised not to look up in the sky or be outdoors and look up in the sky during the spray. And I don't, the vehicle part, I don't think, I haven't seen any data, but I haven't looked really at that. It certainly, it does wash off quickly. So to the extent that, it's a sticky substance. So if you can avoid, put it in the garage or cover, whether it's your car or your other furniture or other things on your home, your other property, it's probably, if it's not too much trouble and it's feasible to do, it's a good thing to do. And then after that, washing it off, simple water, I think is probably a good approach to take.
Yep, thank you. Another question from a resident: is it true that the caterpillar has a cyclical pattern? Example, 7-year peaks and valleys.
Yeah, I can take that one, Steph. Great question. I wish I could have talked about that a little bit more in the presentation. We were trying to cram a lot of program details in there, but there's so much to know about LDD as an insect and as a being. But yes, so generally speaking, LDD does exhibit cyclical patterns of growth. So it goes from long periods of just sort of simmering at low population levels to rapid expansion and outbreak. And that sort of whole cycle typically is sort of 7 to 10 years between those outbreak levels. But once we do reach an outbreak, it can last for a couple of years. So I think they say around 2 to 4. As mentioned in the presentation, the initial signs of outbreak really were reached back in Mississauga in 2017, which is why we did the 2018 aerial spray. It did knock back the population quite a bit for the following years, but now we're right back up there to those outbreak levels again. So hopefully we're nearing the end of that cycle, but there's no real way to predict if and when it is going to crash soon.
Okay, thank you. Question here just about advance notice, and I'll have to step in here. Communication is so important, and as Paul has mentioned in the presentation, we have a number of areas where you can find information, and we want you to stay engaged, so definitely on the website. That will point you to those, but the question was about being notified in advance of the spraying, and we are notifying all the areas in advance of spraying. That's correct, Paul?
Yes, that's correct. So we'll only really be able to provide that 48-hour notification for the actual spray dates. So there are a number of key things to stay informed. Frequently check the website because the website will have that information. You can call into 311. 311 will have the information at hand as well. You can check our online map. That's probably, if you have access to a computer and you have access to internet, that is probably one of the best ways you can stay informed because it'll show exactly which areas are proposed to be sprayed on which days. Once we get that green light from our consultants that the timing is right. And also you can sign up for those email notifications. So when we do have that 48 hours notification, we will blast out an email to everyone who is signed up saying, here's the plan for the next, for the spray. And I'm forgetting one of them. Oh yes, follow us on social media. If you follow us there, we'll be posting information on how to stay up to date with the spray times.
Okay, I know we are watching our time here. Let me see if a good question, something that we haven't answered.
Yes, sorry. And I do appreciate, yes, there's a time check. We will be, and we do have 5 more minutes to ask a few more questions, and
Okay.
then the session will be done.
Okay, we're doing our best.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I might even have one for Brent here. I'm not sure. Does the city have a plan to continue the spraying program regularly, i.e. every 2 years, to be proactive in keeping the population under control?
Thanks, Steph. Finally, I get to speak, eh? Yeah, we have put into practice a regular budget request moving forward. Before 2018, the timeline between the sprays was about 11 years, and the expectation again around that cyclical nature of the pest was expected to be about 7 years again, and it's jumped up in bidders, quite frankly. So knowing that now that there's potential for environmental effects that could increase populations from time to time, we've done asks and council has approved for more funding to monitor this. We monitor it on a yearly basis, but we have now made it possible that if the monitoring indicates that there's going to be a need for a spray, that we can be more agile and do more frequent sprays if required. So yes, we could potentially do sprays every 2 years. Cross your fingers, we don't have to. I don't want to be doing this every 2 years, but yeah, it's possible we could. And the other thing too is what I'll add is with the funding that we will have every 2 years, we could put out hotspots. So smaller aerial sprays could be more frequent as opposed to this large, pretty citywide spray. So it could be smaller, 100 acres here and 100 acres there, that kind of thing.
Thank you, Brent. Okay, I think we have time for 2 more because we need to have some closing remarks too. Can you explain the legend on the interactive map? They're finding it a little bit confusing. Is that possible to do while we're online here?
Sure. Yeah, and I can even bring up the map as well.
That would be
So
great.
just bear with me 1 second while I share my screen. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the map. This is our interactive map of the spray locations. They are going to be color coded. So in the legend, which pops up on the right-hand side, you'll see a number of different colors. The red color, which is all displayed right now, is called planning underway. And that's because these are the areas that we are planning to do the aerial spray. So if I zoom out, you can see the whole city, and you can toggle around to see which areas are included in that aerial spray zone. So right now, all these areas in red that are coded as planning underway are the areas that we are proposing to do the aerial spray within. Now, what you'll see closer to and within that timing window is that some of these may change to a different color, and the colors are coded based on whether we have a specific date in mind for the first treatment. So that's this yellow color where it says first treatment application scheduled, and you'll be able to click on that and see the date where it's scheduled to occur. Once that spray is completed, we will change that to this sort of orangey color where it says first treatment completed. And because there are 2 sprays, we also want to then color code things again if we have the final date for the treatment scheduled. So that'll be in the light blue. And when that final date, final spray is completed, we'll change it to the dark blue color. Now, the additional color here in the pink is if we have to reschedule something. So if we've scheduled something to occur, say May 15th, but based on the weather conditions, say on that day, we have to postpone it, then we'll change the color to indicate that it's postponed and that we're still trying to determine what the next suitable date is for that spray. So right now, if you're looking at it and if you're confused by what these colors mean, because everything is in red, it just means these are the areas that we're proposing to spray. We just haven't selected any dates for the sprays just yet. But that'll change as the season goes on.
Okay, thanks, Paul. A number of questions we didn't get to. There's one here that I'm going to answer. It's involves that as we mentioned earlier, the city is just one participant here, so everyone has a role to play to help eradicate LDD as best we can. And there was a question: should we still perform burlap wrapping until the day of the spray? So in closing, I'll take this. Yes, until the moths show, you should still use the burlap treatment. So it's an effective tactic, and we will obviously continue to be doing that too throughout the year. So on that note, we have some closing remarks and just some takeaways for everyone. We want to thank everybody who attended tonight, especially on a beautiful night like this. At one point during the evening, we had about 220 participants, which was excellent. Great turnout, and we appreciate your involvement so much. Again, I'd like to say thank you to Ward 1, Councillor Stephen Dasco, Ward 2, Pat Mullen, Ward 3, Councillor Fonseca, Ward 6, Councillor Ron Starr, Ward 8, Matt Mahoney, and I know Jody Robolos, our Commissioner of Community Services, had stepped in for a moment, but I'm not sure if she's still here. But we want to thank her too for being here, especially to the entire staff and team for being here with us tonight and great presentations. Protecting our urban forests from invasive species is a big challenge. We all know that. We all have a part to play, as I mentioned, in learning to mitigate the effects of LDD so we can ensure a healthy and vibrant city and urban canopy for everyone. Our trees are very precious to us. I'm just going to give you a couple takeaways, and Helia, maybe you can put up the communication messaging on our website while I'm doing that so folks can write that down. Shouldn't give me a microphone. One of the key takeaway messages from tonight is that we want you to stay engaged, just as I mentioned, before, during, and after the spray. We want to ensure that you know what is going on and have information you need to feel comfortable during this year's spray. As mentioned in the presentation night, the best way to learn more about the program and stay informed about the air spray is visit our websites, and Helia is going to put that up for you. The website's updated regularly, and as more information becomes available, so please keep visiting. It also reminds us of other ways we can stay up to date with the spray activities. Important ones are by signing up for email alerts, checking that interactive map that Paul just outlined, or calling into our 311 center. Another takeaway from tonight is there are many ways that you can manage LDD on your own properties. LDD is firmly established in Mississauga and Southern Ontario, so we're not alone. Complete eradication is not possible. So although we have to live with this pest, there are options that you as residents can take to help manage LDD on your properties and minimize or mitigate its effects. You've heard about some of those tonight, but please check the website for more information and resources about what you can do. On that note, a recording of tonight's session will also be posted shortly after on the website for you to view and watch again, and or share with those of your neighbors who were not able to attend tonight. And on that note, I want to thank you all again for joining us. And on behalf of the City of Mississauga, we wish you a great night. Thank you.